I never thought I would tell this story out loud. For years, I kept it buried because even now, part of me still struggles to believe it happened. My name is Sarah, and 10 years ago I was living what most people would call the American dream. My husband, David, and I owned a beautiful home in Colorado, had 2 wonderful children, stable jobs, and plans for the future. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but sometimes the biggest storms begin when the sky looks completely clear. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning when David kissed me goodbye before work, grabbed his coffee, and promised he would be home early for our daughter Emma's school concert. I remember teasing him because he had made the same promise several times before and always ended up working late. Before walking out the door, he smiled and said, "This time I mean it." Those were the last words I ever heard him say. At 2:17 that afternoon, my phone rang while I was folding laundry. I almost ignored the call because I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. A state trooper was on the other end. At first, I assumed David had been in a minor accident. Then the officer asked if I was sitting down. My entire world changed before he even finished speaking. David had been killed instantly when a truck lost control on an icy highway. I remember dropping the phone, screaming, and collapsing onto the kitchen floor. Everything after that felt like a blur. Family members arrived, neighbors came over, people hugged me and offered condolences, but nothing felt real. The hardest moment came later that evening when my children walked through the front door. Emma was 9 years old, and Jake was 12. They immediately sensed something was wrong. When Emma asked where her father was, I somehow found the strength to tell them the truth. The heartbreaking sound that came from my daughter when she realized her father was gone forever is something I will never forget. The funeral was painful, but what came afterward was even harder. Everyone talks about grief during the first few days, but nobody talks about the silence that follows when the visitors stop coming and life expects you to keep moving. Every night after putting the kids to bed, I sat alone in the living room staring at David's shoes by the door, his jacket hanging in the closet, and his coffee mug still sitting in the cabinet. I couldn't bring myself to move any of it. Meanwhile, the bills kept arriving. The mortgage payment was due, insurance needed renewing, and responsibilities didn't disappear just because my husband had. I soon discovered something frightening. David had handled most of our finances. I knew the basics, but not enough. Savings were smaller than I expected. Debt was larger than I realized, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely terrified. One night, after the children were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and cried harder than I ever had before. I wasn't just grieving my husband. I was terrified of losing our home, failing my children, and facing the future alone. The next morning, despite having no answers, I got up because Emma needed breakfast and Jake needed a ride to school. Life kept moving, so I moved with it. I worked extra hours, cut every unnecessary expense, sold jewelry I rarely wore, and canceled plans we could no longer afford. For nearly 2 years, every day felt like survival. Then another challenge arrived when Jake began getting into trouble at school. It started with missed assignments and arguments with teachers, but eventually I received a call from the principal informing me that my son had been involved in a fight. During the drive to school, I was angry and prepared to lecture him. But when I arrived and saw him sitting alone outside the principal's office with tears in his eyes, everything changed. That night, he finally admitted something he had been carrying inside for years. Through tears, he said, "I don't remember Dad's voice anymore." Those words shattered me. I realized that while I had been fighting to save our finances, my children had been fighting to hold on to memories of their father. That evening, we gathered in the living room and watched old family videos for hours. We laughed at silly moments, cried at precious memories, and remembered the man we all loved. For the first time since David died, it felt like we were healing instead of merely surviving. As the years passed, life slowly became manageable again. The mortgage was paid, the children grew older, and the grief softened. It never disappeared completely, but it changed shape. People often think healing means forgetting, but that isn't true. I still think about David almost every day. Sometimes I still reach for my phone when something funny happens because my first instinct is to tell him. Sometimes I see someone wearing a jacket similar to his and my heart skips a beat. But grief becomes easier to carry over time. Nearly 8 years after David's death, Emma sat beside me on the porch as she prepared to leave for college. After a few moments of silence, she looked at me and asked, "Mom, do you know what Dad would be proud of?" I smiled and asked what she meant. She squeezed my hand and simply said, "You?" Tears instantly filled my eyes. For years, I had questioned whether I was strong enough, whether I had made the right decisions, and whether I had somehow failed my family. In that single moment, my daughter answered every one of those doubts. Looking back now, I realize that the worst day of my life did not destroy me. It changed me. It forced me to discover strength I never knew I possessed. If there is one thing I learned from losing my husband, it is that you do not need to have all the answers today. You do not need to be fearless. You only need enough courage to take the next step and then the step after that. Because sometimes survival becomes healing, healing becomes growth, and one day you wake up and realize you made it through a chapter you once believed would break you forever. That is when you finally understand that human beings are often far stronger than they ever imagine.